Thank you, Fabrizio, and thank you also for the organizers for the invitation and the possibility to be here and talk about this important issue of RDE. I will try to give a short overview of our expectations and also a first view on the use and the experience of this RDE procedure. I will start with a short presentation of the Swedish Transport Agency, just to understand what we do and why. We have a vision that we will enable the travel and transport needs for the tomorrow. The mission of the Swedish Transport Agency is to develop an accessible transport system with a view to safety, environment and health. We also formulate regulation and monitor compliance. We collect certain taxes and fees within the area of transportation, like congestion tax, vehicle registration tax, and a few road tolls that we have in Sweden. We are an authority under the Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation. The government determines our objectives, guidelines, and allocations of resources and such things. We are around 2,000 employees at 13 locations in Sweden, and the main locations is Norrköping, where the headquarters is, Borlänge, where the road traffic is, where I work, and Örebro, where we have the vehicle registration part of the authority. We work with all 4 transport modes, road traffic, railway, civil aviation and maritime. Our tools is to formulate regulations, examine and grant permits. We conduct supervision, and we use some kind of risk-based supervision on those areas. And we also keep statistics regarding accidents on the roads. And we also keep register of vehicles. Well, emission from real driving. Member states and all other stakeholders have a high expectation on the new RDE test procedure in order to improve the air quality in Europe. The third act will improve the robustness of the procedure. The fourth act, with in-service conformity and independent testing, is even more important step to improve the emission performance in real driving and improve the robustness of the produced vehicles and the approvals. I would also like to say that vehicles affect the environment in different ways. We have global emissions of greenhouse gases, and we also have local emissions that have an impact on the health of humans, like particles, NOx, and carbon monoxide. And yes, and I think that it is important that we distinguish between these emissions. Of course, they interact in some way. If you, for example, introduce some measures or incentives to reduce greenhouse gases, you can, which means that you reduce the traffic. You also reduces the local emissions, of course, and vice versa. Also, if you set some requirements on environmental zones that limits the use of vehicles in cities, then you also reduce the emissions of the global emissions in that area. So there are some connections between these, but in order well, as I said, the real driving emissions is important for Sweden, and we have a long history of in-service test program, and that's one of the objectives of the Transport Agency at the moment, to do supervision of vehicle emissions. And we are also responsible for this in-service test program. It has a long history in Sweden. We started late 80s. At that time, under the responsibility of the Swedish EPA. And then it has been under the responsibility of different authorities until now, where the Swedish Transport Agency are responsible. We have tested more than 800 vehicles during the years. And in principle, the objective is to test according to the regulation and according to how the vehicles was approved. But we have also, during the latest years, also started to do emission performance tests of in-use vehicles in other conditions than the approval. Like we use other test cycles in order to collect emission factors that is used to update the emission models like HBEFE. Like I said, we normally do the testing according to the regulation, the type 1 test, but we also have done type 2 test, type 4 test, and type 6 test, although there is no durability requirements on these tests. And we did find some problems with the type 4 test a few years ago, and that led to the development of the new procedure in the European Union. The additional cycles we have been driven is the common Artemis cycle, and the latest year we now drive the WLTC cycle in combination with Hermes cycle for these emission factors. And we also do PEMS testing. The last 5-6 years we started with a few vehicles per year, and now we are up to increasing the number of vehicles we test with PEMS test. Normally we use the market fuel, the fuel that is in the tank when we receive the vehicles. If we find anything non-compliant, we do change to the reference fuel. We also do a check of the OBD system. We simulate simple failures in the system and see how the system reacts. We could, of course, not deteriorate components like a catalyst and such a thing, because that's quite expensive, but we try to simulate simple failures and see how the system reacts. We test 13 to 15 vehicle models per year, and we have 3 to 5 individual vehicles per model. The vehicle selection is based on the sales statistic in Sweden, and sometimes we also are interested to look in new technology that's released on the market, so we also try to test these kind of vehicles. The vehicles is collected from Swedish owners, and sometimes we use rental cars. The mileage is between 1,500 to 100,000 kilometers. The service and maintenance should be done according to the manufacturer's recommendation in order to be an interesting vehicle for us to test. And about the financing of this program, it's quite expensive to do a test of around 75 vehicles per year. Since the beginning, we had a fee for every new sold vehicle in Sweden. At the moment, it's around 5 euros per sold vehicle that is collected by the Swedish Transport Agency, and then we give it back to the government, and they give it back to us, so we can use it for this test program. I will show you some of the results from some of the tests we have done the last years. This slide shows the results from PEMS test on the compression ignition vehicles. Let's see, where's the button? Yeah. The first vehicles here is done quite a long time ago, when it was a Euro 4. The latest vehicles here, Euro 6, are done in principle according to the present RD first and second act. I don't know if you would like to draw a special trend to see that emissions have decreased during the years. I would say that it hasn't, which in my view says that the need for an RD procedure is very, very much needed. For positive ignition vehicles, we also have done some tests, and the NOx emission is normally no problem. With one exception, the limit value for NOx emissions on positive ignition is 60 milligram per kilometers. This one was one exception. This was actually 3 vehicles. This is the average of 3 vehicles, where one vehicle was quite okay. It was around this level. 2 of them were very high, as you can see. Well, there is no problem to comply with the requirements still, but maybe this is something we need to keep an eye on. For positive ignition vehicles, there are other emission components that might be more of a problem. CO, for instance, could be one. The limit value is 1 gram, and we can see of the few vehicles we have already tested that it can be some. This one is one example. It's with very high emissions, and this time also it's the average of 3 vehicles. In principle, you could say that the smaller vehicles with smaller engines could have some problems with it. Now there is no conformity factor for CO, but maybe we should think about that also, perhaps. We also did testing in the lab, as I said before. This is a comparison between NADC, which is the green bar, and other cycles we have done during, well, since 2012 in this case. Normally, the NADC is no problem. We will always comply, except for this one. And that was an interesting story because this is the average of 3 vehicles. 2 of the vehicles was okay. One of the vehicles, or the value that is giving this high average is because the first test was done without some kind of dyno mode. We retested this vehicle, and the manufacturer did set the vehicle in a dyno mode, and then the result was okay. So I haven't made any conclusion on what this means, but this is a recent test, and we will continue to have a discussion with this manufacturer to see what could be the problem. Otherwise, one of the conclusions is that the only difference is that we have used another cycle in these tests. The road loads and all other settings in the vehicle is the same. So the thing is that's giving higher emissions is the cycle. Euro 6 is of course better, but still the relative difference between an NADC test and the other cycle is in the same order of magnitude as the other Euro 5 vehicles. We have also done particle number test on positive ignition with other cycles, and well, I wouldn't say that it is a problem even for the Euro 6 vehicles. They probably need some adaptation in order to comply with the coming limit values, also for the NADC cycle. We have not done that many PEMS tests with the particle number system, but we have two results from 2 vehicles here with positive ignition. And well, they are on the borderline to comply with the requirements, but maybe they should do some improvement to completely fulfill the RD procedure. Since these are tests done on quite normal conditions with 20 degrees, so there are maybe some room for improvement on the vehicles on this case. We have, since Sweden is up in the northern part of Europe, we of course are very concerned about lower temperatures, since a large part of the year is very cold. We have performed a test at NADC with lower temperatures with compression ignition vehicles at 5 degrees and -7 degrees. We also have done PEMS tests at lower temperatures, but not that many tests yet. Well, this shows the average temperature in Sweden. The left picture is the yearly average, which is in the south part 8 degrees and the northern part -3 degrees. And the right picture is the average temperature in January. And it's quite cold, you would say, if you are from the middle of Europe. So this is the results from the test we've done with these different temperatures. The green bar is NADC at 20 degrees, and of course, they do comply with their limit values. The limit value is, it's mostly Euro 5 vehicles, so the limit value is 180. With one exception, this Euro 6 vehicle. And it's quite good results in 20, but the relative difference is quite high, just changing the temperature, as with all other vehicles also. Now you need to know that this is Euro 5 vehicles, and well, it might not be the best way to compare to the Euro 6 and the coming RDE procedure, but it gives some idea that we need to do some improvements of the vehicles, even in lower temperatures. Well, we have a great expectation that RDE can improve air quality, since we can see that emissions in real world is higher, not only when driving in real world in normal conditions, also when you drive with other drive cycles and temperatures. And many regions in European Union has emerging problem with air quality, especially in larger cities. We have used this information we have learned during the year from this test program as input for emission modeling. We also have used this as input for the development of the emission regulation like RDE and WLTP. There's also one thing that you could think of, that it's very easy for a vehicle owner to require low fuel consumption and low CO2 emissions. But few vehicle owners require low pollutant. There are no incentives to choose a vehicle with lower pollutants of the regulated emissions. Maybe this will change now when we have the RDE declared value. It will give the possibility to also choose a vehicle that are lower pollutants. And there's another thing you need to think of, the right vehicle at the right place. Maybe a responsibility for manufacturers to sell vehicles, that they should sell the right vehicle for the right need. If you are mostly driving on motorways, long distance, a diesel vehicle might be good, since the local emissions will not affect that many others. And if you are driving mostly in the city, a diesel vehicle might not be the best solution, since the local emissions is quite high then. There are other options that might be better, like electric vehicles or hybrids. I think this is in some way a responsibility of all, not only the manufacturers, also the member states and other stakeholders need to think about this to promote that the right vehicle is used at the right place. As I said, RDE is a step forward, and the conformity factors, the declared conformity factor, can be used for incentives and other areas and other things. So the RDE procedure is that we can assess emissions from vehicles in normal use. The procedure is introduced to complement the normal test in the lab with today NADC and in the future WLTP. And this has the great potential to improve the emission performance of vehicles in normal use. The definition of emission type is also new with these new regulations, and this means that the families will look different, and maybe this also could be an improvement in how vehicles will be tested and approved. We have a legal limit for Euro 6, 80 milligram per kilometers. And in normal use, we see that we have emissions of quite higher amplitude. You can have emissions from 300 to 1,000 milligram per kilometers or more in normal use. We have an expectation that the RDE procedure will cover this green area also and reduce the emissions to the, well, maybe not to 80 milligram, but down to the NT value. In the first step, it will be 168 milligram per kilometer and then 120 in the second step of the RD. I will give a short introduction to what is included in the different acts of RD. I know Penne did it very good before me. The first act introduces the test procedure. It also introduced the boundary conditions for the RD procedure. And it also introduced a moderate and extended conditions in order to distinguish between normal use in a statistical way. It also sets the requirement for the monitoring periods, which started from 1st January 2016. The second act defines the conformity factors for the RD test. It is set in 2 steps. The first, temporary conformity factors with 2.1 for NOx emission and 1.5 then for a particle number. It's not in this picture since it was actually adopted in the third act. The final conformity factor is 1 with a margin of 0.5 to reflect the uncertainty in the test measurement equipment. The second act also introduces the implementation date of the RD procedure, which also Penne showed the comprehensive list of dates, starting with 1st of September 2017, with step 2 of the RD from 1st of January 2020. The second act also introduces the dynamic boundary conditions in order to normalize against extreme driving behavior. It also introduces the extended documentation packets, which means that the manufacturer needs to describe the base emission strategies and also the auxiliary emission strategies in a comprehensive documentation package. This is done when the application for a type approval is handled at the approval authority. The third act introduced the cold start. And now it also introduces the particle number test procedure in the complete RD package. There are some amendments to the extended documentation package and emission strategies also. For instance, the type approval authority have better possibility to assess compliance and defeat devices. And also the documentation should be kept at the type approval authority. It was not that clear in the first or in the second act. We also introduces provisions for hybrids and some exemption for small volume manufacturers. We also introduces the possibility for the manufacturer to declare a conformity factor. And Penny mentioned that the manufacturer could, if he is certain of his vehicles that they will perform good, they can declare a lower conformity factor. And this has some implications for incentives and for member states' possibility to, maybe vehicle taxes or other things. We have to see how we will use this value in the future. The fourth act, which is currently under discussion very intensively, we will introduce the in-service conformity procedure, including a statistical procedure which will be changed from the current procedure. It will increase the robustness and the risk for both the manufacturer and for the legislator. It will also introduce the possibility for testing by independent parties. Of course, testing by independent is already today possible, but the importance and the possibility in the legislation for an independent to have his test assessed also will be strengthened in this fourth act. There are some new provisions for light commercial vehicles and multi-stage vehicles also that will be introduced. And also there is a review of the evaluation methods and a review of the uncertainty margin. How will this affect the Swedish in-service test program? Well, we will develop our test protocol And we will use this guidance for that the Commission produced end last year, I believe, for to more have the possibility to find the defeat devices and other things that could be a problem with vehicles. We will also introduce more RD tests in our test protocol. We have increased, so in principle we do test more RD than we do test in the lab this year's test program. We will also follow up the introduction of RD compliant vehicles as soon as they are available on the market. We will also try to use other measures to get information on how vehicles are performing in the real world. We will use some kind of SEMS, or we will start a study to see how SEMS can be used. And SEMS is simplified emission measurement. You don't need a complete PEMS system. You can do it in a simpler way. And in this way, we can install this on a larger number of vehicles and have a greater picture on how a vehicle performs. And we also consider remote sensing to identify outliers. And one other thing I would like to mention also, we see on the heavy-duty side, we see a large or an increased problem with manipulation and AdBlue killers and, well, chip tuning, whatever you call it. We have not that big understanding on how big this problem is at the moment. And we will try to find out how big problem it is and what we can do to stop this kind of activities. Since if we will put a lot of effort to develop the emission legislation to have better performing vehicles, and then as far as when the vehicle owner gets a vehicle, he straight away go to some third party and buy a device and sets the emission performance out of the scope completely. We see this is a big risk, and when we now introduce RD for light-duty vehicles and SCR technology, we don't know today, but there can be a risk that this will be a problem also. So we need to be careful and look at this to not see that it will become a big problem. Well, conclusion. The RD has a great potential to improve emission performance from vehicles in real world and normal driving. And all parties need to take their responsibility, not only the manufacturer. It's easy to blame the manufacturer, but all parties need to take their responsibility. Approval authorities, all member states and NGOs need to take their responsibility to make sure that vehicles perform well on the streets. Third-party testing is an important part of this to accomplish this. And also vehicle user, buyer, need to change their objective. They need to think more of not only fuel consumption and CO2, they will also need to think about emissions of NOx and particles. And in order to do this, maybe they need some incentives to change this behavior. The manipulation by third parties, as we see on the heavy-duty side, is an increasing problem, and we need to think very well on this, also on the light-duty side, to see that it's not becoming a problem, that we introduce a lot of very good regulations, but as soon as the vehicles are on the street, they are bypassed. And third act is still waiting for publication in official journal, and now Penny showed that it will be 7th of July. That was very good information, but we still wait for this publication because this is very important both for manufacturers and approval authorities in order to continue to work with this. Well, this was some kind of chip tuning device, I think. They are very small and very cheap, and the vehicle, at least on the heavy-duty side, they can earn a lot of money on this in saving not using AdBlue. So, yeah. Thank you for your attention, and I will be welcome to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open for questions. I guess there's one here in the front already from Penny. In the meantime, just a quick question on this last bit you showed, we've been seeing reports of chip tuning defeat devices in Eastern Europe, Germany, but have you seen anything in Sweden?
Well, actually we have. The police have done some roadside inspection and found some of these vehicles also in Sweden. The problem is that we have a weak legal base to do something about it. We need to improve this. So, but we have found this problem also in Sweden. I can't say it's which origin the vehicles are from, but we see an increasing problem with this, and we see also ads in the newspaper and on internet for these products. So it could be a very large share. I think so.
Okay, thank you. Penny?
Thank you. Actually, it has to do with this tampering, but not only. There are two issues. First of all, I wanted to explain that we are looking very close as well. It's something that I didn't mention before, on tampering in the European Commission, trying to see how we can address this problem, not only by DG GROW, but we are involving also DG MOVE, who is responsible for vehicles in the market, so the roadworthiness directive and so on. This is one thing, and we have had discussions in the motor vehicle emission group on this. So we know the problem, we try to see how we can fix it. And one of the issues, as I have shown in one of the slides, is building evidence. And this evidence is both by SEMS, as Per said, and remote sensing. So another thing we did is we asked the Joint Research Center of the European Commission to test remote sensing devices and to test in the second phase SEMS devices. So they will have a program ongoing already next week for remote sensing, and it will be followed by SEMS program.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for this. Are there any questions for Per? Okay, one here in the front.
Yep, Per, you mentioned that the legal basis is very weak to sanction tampering. Is there any specific initiative already taking place in Sweden to introduce legislation which fines this very harshly? And shouldn't it be done?
Yes, well, I can't say that it's not, it's on the way. We have started the discussion with the different parties in Sweden to see what we can do, because we have initial meetings with the police who did this roadside inspections and found this problem, and they at that time discovered that they have no legal base to make any sanctions to these owners or vehicles or something. So we have initiated this a few weeks ago, and we will look into what possibility we have to change the regulation in order to, in some way, give sanctions to this and make it more difficult to use these devices.
Okay. And Per, there's one question over there.
Ignacio Garcia from Opel. You said in your presentation that you are testing already for years in service conformity from Swedish drivers ranging from 1,500 kilometers to 100,000 kilometers. Is there any, or in which way do you choose these drivers? Do you, are they somehow randomly selected and you force them to lend you their vehicles, or is there any incentive program so that people give you the vehicle for this testing? Thank you. Yeah, well, the test is performed by an accredited lab, a technical service. The vehicle, as I said, we use the vehicle selection based on sales statistic. So we put a list together with the vehicle model we decide to test for a year, and then we pick out certain examples. And if we're testing 3 or 5 vehicles, we do
pick more than that, and then we send a letter to these vehicle owners asking them if they would like to contribute and have their vehicle available for our test. And when we get answers from these vehicle owners, we do check that with the manufacturer if the service and maintenance is done according to their specifications, because they, of course, they have records of these. So, and then the manufacturer of this vehicle then say these vehicles are okay, and then we continue with this vehicle that is okay and do pick 3 or 5 vehicles of these.
Another one here.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Per. So you are saying that you test, you make RDA tests at standard and extended temperatures, or low temperatures, let's say, right? Do you see a similar difference compared to the laboratory testing for both, like 23 degrees and -7, or there is a larger difference in any of the two conditions?
Well, I would say that you can see a correlation between lab test and PEMS test with lower temperatures, yes. Now, we haven't done any test down to -7 yet, but around 0 and 5 something we have done. But I would say that you can see a correlation between.
Great. Any final questions? There's one or at the back.
Just a point of clarification, please. Could you explain what is the difference between a PEMS and a SEMS? SEMS is simplified, but are you comfortable that it still performs the function as needs be?
Well, yes. Maybe I'm not the expert on the instrumentation, but a PEM system, then you have quite large instrumentation on the vehicle with a flow meter, and you extract the emissions from this pipe and have analyzed in a measurement system. SEMS is simplified, where you use a normal NOx sensor that you install in the exhaust pipe. So it's a simpler installation. That's.
But doesn't apply to all the components. It doesn't comply to particle number and CO and hydrocarbon.
In principle, we measure NOx. At the moment, we only.
Okay.
Our objective is NOx emission with this simplified. I'm not sure there are a simplified system for other components. Maybe other knows better than me, but we are focusing on NOx emission with this simplified system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and just a final question to you, but also something that is going to be discussed in the two next presentations. But because you showed some results, it would still be good to get your thoughts on that. The discrepancies on NOx results and NEDC and WLTP, they're quite strong. Mm-hmm. And just look at these results, it's a bit hard to understand how we're going to meet the 80 grams per kilometer under WLTP.
Well, these vehicles are.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, these vehicles are, of course, designed for NEDC and approved according to NEDC. So I guess manufacturers need to improve in order to. For they need to comply with WLTP 80 milligram also, of course. Then if it's the same type or not, that is not what I can answer on. That's a question to the manufacturers, but they will need to comply when they apply for approval with WLTP, of course.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.